The challenge begins. The air was cold and heavy with silence. Hundreds of alien soldiers stood in a wide circle, their black armor shining under the pale light of the battlefield. Their weapons were raised, not because they were needed, but because the queen wanted her army to witness what was about to happen. At the center of the circle stood a man, a human. His back was straight, his muscles tense, and his eyes calm. He wore no armor, only torn combat trousers, and across his chest were scars, marks of countless battles he had survived. He was alone, surrounded by thousands, and yet he looked as if he had been waiting for this moment all his life. From the edge of the circle, the alien queen stepped forward. Her tall figure was draped in dark silver robes that shimmered like liquid metal. Her skin glowed faintly blue, and her eyes burned with pride. She lifted her chin and looked down at the human as if he were nothing but prey. "You should feel honored," she said, her voice echoing across the battlefield. "No outsider has ever faced what you are about to face. Today, I unleash my strongest warriors, 10 soldiers who have crushed every enemy set before them. Not one has survived." The crowd roared in agreement. The sound of alien voices shook the ground. The queen's 10 warriors stepped forward from the shadows, each larger and more terrifying than the last. Their armor was black as night, glowing with lines of energy that pulsed like veins of fire. Their weapons were longer, sharper, and deadlier than anything in human design. The warriors moved into position, forming a half-circle around the human. They stood like living statues, their breathing mechanical, their eyes glowing red. The sight was enough to make even the bravest creature in the galaxy tremble. But the human did not tremble. He did not flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, listening to the queen's boast, and then slowly, a smile formed across his face. The queen narrowed her eyes. "What amuses you, human?" The man turned his gaze to the 10 warriors, then back to her. His voice was low but carried across the battlefield. "Finally," he said, "some fun." The crowd fell silent. For the first time, the aliens felt something they had never felt before when facing an enemy: doubt. The queen's lips curled into a smile of her own. She thought his arrogance would be his downfall. "You will regret those words," she said sharply. "My warriors will break you piece by piece. Your body will be a warning to the rest of your kind." But the human only rolled his shoulders, loosening his muscles, like a predator preparing to strike. His calmness unsettled the soldiers. They had seen enemies beg for mercy, cry out in terror, and collapse under fear. Never had they seen someone smile. The queen raised her hand, and the 10 warriors stepped forward as one. Their boots struck the ground in perfect rhythm, shaking the dust and sending vibrations across the circle. Sparks of energy lit up their weapons as they aimed them at the man's chest. Every soldier in the crowd leaned forward, eager to watch the human fall. They believed it would end quickly, like it always had before. The man, however, stood still. His eyes scanned each warrior, not with fear, but with the precision of a soldier calculating his next move. He noticed their patterns, their weapons, the way they shifted their weight. Every detail, every motion, he studied with calm intensity. "Begin," the queen commanded. The warriors roared as they rushed toward him, their weapons glowing like streaks of lightning. The air exploded with sound, metal clashing, sparks flying, energy beams crackling. The first strike came down like a hammer, aiming to crush his skull. At the last second, the man moved. He ducked, spun, and his hand caught the warrior's arm, twisting it with unnatural speed. A sharp crack echoed through the air as the alien's armor dented under the human strength. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The queen's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. The man released the warrior, stepping back into the center. His chest rose and fell steadily, his smile still carved into his face. "Is that all?" he asked, his voice calm, mocking. The 10 warriors regrouped, their movements sharper now, their rage burning hotter. They had faced hundreds of enemies, and none had ever survived the first strike. But this human was different. He was not just surviving. He was enjoying it. The queen clenched her fists. She would not admit it, but deep inside, a seed of unease began to grow. The stories whispered across the stars about humans, about their stubbornness, their strength, their will to fight, suddenly did not seem like myths anymore. The man raised his fists, his body ready, his eyes blazing with fire. "Come on," he said softly, almost laughing. "I was getting bored." And with those words, the true battle began. The first clash. The ground trembled as the Queen's 10 warriors surged forward like a black storm. Their armor glowed with pulses of energy, their weapons blazing with sparks of fire. The crowd of alien soldiers roared with excitement, but deep inside, there was silence, a silence of fear they refused to admit. The human stood in the middle, his body calm, his eyes sharp. For him, time slowed. He counted every step, every weapon swing, every angle. The first warrior came from the left, his blade humming with energy. The man leaned aside just enough, letting the blade cut the air. His fist shot upward, striking the warrior's chin with bone-crushing force. The alien stumbled back, sparks flying from his helmet. But there was no pause. 2 more warriors attacked at once. One aimed low, sweeping his blade toward the human's legs, while the other stabbed forward like a spear. The human jumped, twisting his body mid-air. He landed between them, grabbing the stabbing weapon with bare hands. Sparks burned across his skin, but he did not let go. With a violent twist, he pulled the weapon forward, slamming it into the chest of the other alien. The armor dented, the warrior fell, gasping. The crowd gasped too. They had never seen anyone break formation like this. The Queen's eyes narrowed. The remaining warriors adjusted, moving like predators. They circled him, weapons raised high, cutting off every escape path. The man turned slowly, studying them, his chest rising with steady breaths. Sweat slid down his back, mixing with the dust and sparks in the air. One warrior lunged from behind. Another struck from the front. Their blades moved like lightning, but the human bent low, rolling between them. His elbow drove into one alien's ribs with a sound like cracking stone. He spun, slamming his palm into the other's helmet, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Now, the circle was broken. The crowd of soldiers began to murmur. Fear spread like fire through them. Still, 6 warriors remained. They roared as one, their voices echoing like thunder, and charged again. This time, they moved faster, striking together in perfect rhythm. Blades sliced through the air. Sparks of energy lit the ground like falling stars. The man blocked one strike with his forearm, ignoring the burn of energy across his skin. He caught another blade with his bare hand, the sharp edge cutting into flesh, but he pushed forward anyway. Blood ran down his arm, but his eyes blazed brighter than ever. With a sudden burst of strength, he lifted the warrior off his feet and hurled him into 2 others. The impact cracked armor, sending all 3 crashing to the ground. The Queen leaned forward, her lips parting in disbelief. This human, he was not just resisting, he was winning. Only 3 warriors stood firm now, their glowing eyes burning with rage. They advanced slowly, more cautious than before. The man flexed his fists, blood dripping, his chest rising with heavy breaths. His smile had not faded. "You're stronger than the others," he said softly, almost as if he were enjoying himself. "Good. Don't disappoint me." The 3 warriors attacked as one, their movements sharper, faster, deadlier. Every strike shook the ground. Every swing of their weapons left burning trails in the air. The human fought like a storm, dodging, striking, blocking, moving with raw instinct and skill born of endless battles. He ducked under a strike, slammed his fist into a warrior's stomach, then spun to kick another in the chest. But the third caught him with a heavy blow across his back, forcing him to stumble. Dust exploded around him as he hit the ground. The crowd erupted in cheers. They thought the fight was ending. The Queen's smile returned. But then the man laughed. A deep, rough laugh that silenced the noise. Slowly, he rose, blood dripping down his arms, dirt covering his skin. His body shook with pain, but his eyes glowed with fire. He looked at the warriors, then at the Queen, and spoke. "Finally," he said, This is getting interesting. The three warriors stepped back, unsettled by the sound of his laughter. And the queen, for the first time, felt something she had not felt in years: fear. The human's secret. The battlefield was covered in dust and sparks. Three of the queen's strongest warriors stood firm, their glowing eyes locked on the human. The rest lay broken on the ground, shattered armor, cracked weapons, groaning in defeat. The alien crowd was silent now. Where moments ago they had cheered with confidence, now fear had crawled into their voices. This human, this lone fighter, was not falling. Instead, he seemed to grow stronger with every strike. The queen's lips tightened. She studied him closely. His breathing was heavy, his arms bloodied, but his stance was solid. There was something unnatural about him, something she could not understand. The human rolled his shoulders, ignoring the sting of wounds across his back. His eyes burned with a fire that even the alien warriors had never seen. Then, for the first time, he spoke not to the queen, but to himself. Just like before, he whispered, just like the trenches. The words meant nothing to the aliens, but in his mind, memories erupted. He saw himself on a battlefield far from here, years ago, when he was only a soldier among many. The air had been thick with smoke and screams. Human soldiers outnumbered 10-1. Machines of war had cut down his comrades. Fire rained from the skies. He had been told they would never survive. But humans were strange. They fought even when logic said to surrender. And somehow, against impossible odds, they had won. It was not strength alone. It was the will. The unbreakable, relentless will to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. The human blinked, shaking the images away, and his smile returned. The queen saw it, and her unease deepened. She raised her voice so her soldiers could hear. Do not hold back. He bleeds, he feels pain. In him now. The three warriors obeyed. They moved like shadows, surrounding him again. One charged from the front, another from behind, the third leaping high with a blade aimed at his skull. The human's eyes tracked them all. His body twisted, faster than they expected. He slammed his shoulder into the front warrior, sending him staggering back. His hand snapped upward, catching the falling blade midair, blood spilling from his palm as the energy cut into him. But he did not let go. Instead, he pulled the warrior down and drove his knee into the alien's chest, shattering armor with a single strike. Gasps spread through the crowd. The queen's face froze. This was no ordinary fighter. The last two warriors regrouped, their movements sharper now, their rage burning hot. They attacked together, blades flashing, strikes coming from both sides. Sparks exploded with every clash. The human's arms burned with pain, his blood dripping freely, but still he moved. His fists struck like iron, his counters faster than their eyes could follow. One warrior tried to stab his side, but the human twisted, letting the blade pass just close enough to cut his skin. He grabbed the alien's wrist, spun him around, and with one brutal motion, snapped the joint. The weapon clattered to the ground, useless. The final warrior roared, charging in desperation. The human met him head-on, their fists colliding, the shockwave shaking the dust from the ground. For a long moment, they struggled, strength against strength. The alien pushed with all his might, but the human's eyes did not waver. His grin widened. With a sudden surge, the human shoved him back, then drove his elbow into the alien's throat. The warrior collapsed, choking, his weapon falling from limp hands. And then silence. All 10 of the queen's strongest warriors lay defeated on the ground. Some groaned in pain, others were too broken to move. The human stood among them, blood dripping, his chest rising and falling, but his eyes steady, his body unbroken. He turned slowly toward the queen. The alien crowd no longer cheered. They whispered in fear, their voices trembling. The queen clenched her fists, hiding the unease that spread through her chest. She remembered the old warnings, whispered long ago in council chambers. Do not provoke the humans. They are survivors. They are the ones who fight when logic says they should fall. They are the fire that refuses to die. And now, as she looked at the scarred man standing over her strongest champions, she realized those warnings were not myths. The human raised his bloodied hand, pointing at her. His voice was hoarse but filled with power. "You thought I was just a man," he said, "but you've never fought a human before." The queen's smile faded. For the first time in years, she felt fear. And the crowd, once her loyal army, now watched him with wide, uncertain eyes, as if a single human had just shaken the heart of an empire. Turning the tide, the arena lay in ruins. The ground was torn with cracks, broken weapons scattered like fallen stars. 10 of the queen's champions, the deadliest in her empire, were defeated, their bodies strewn across the dirt. Some still breathed, others groaned in pain, but none could rise again. The alien crowd stood frozen. They had expected glory, a quick and brutal victory. Instead, they had witnessed something impossible, a single human standing against legends and winning. The human stood in the center, his chest rising and falling, sweat and blood streaking across his skin. His fists were red, his scars fresh, but his eyes burned with the same fire that had carried him through countless wars. He spat blood into the dirt, then raised his head toward the queen. She stared back, her expression a mask of steel. But deep inside, her heart pounded. She had ruled with power for decades, her soldiers obeying her without question. She had unleashed her best against this outsider, believing he would be broken in moments. Instead, her faith in her army now trembled. The human took a step forward, and the soldiers in the circle instinctively stepped back. His presence was heavier than their weapons, sharper than their blades. "You wanted a show," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "Now you've got one." The queen's eyes narrowed. She would not allow weakness to spread among her people. With a flick of her wrist, she gave a command. The circle tightened. Hundreds of soldiers raised their weapons, energy blades igniting, rifles glowing with blue light. The air vibrated with their power, but the human only smiled. "Finally," he whispered, "something worth my time." He bent his knees, ready to strike again. The queen clenched her jaw. She had to end this before fear spread any further. The next wave of soldiers rushed forward. They were not champions, but they were many, trained, disciplined, relentless. Their boots shook the ground like thunder as they closed in from all sides. The human moved like a storm. He snatched a fallen alien weapon from the dirt, a glowing spear with crackling energy, and spun it with deadly precision. The first soldier to reach him screamed as the spear pierced his chest. The human twisted, ripping it free, and slammed the butt of the weapon into another soldier's helmet, shattering it like glass. The crowd erupted into chaos. This was no longer a duel, it was slaughter. The queen gripped the edge of her throne, her nails digging into the metal. She had thought numbers would overwhelm him, but the human moved with impossible rhythm. Every strike was brutal, efficient. He dodged energy blasts by inches, his body flowing like water, then answered with strikes that crushed armor and bone alike. 3 soldiers leapt at once, their blades descending. The human caught one blade with his spear, shoved it aside, then twisted low, driving his fist into the gut of another. As that soldier fell, he spun, slamming his elbow into the jaw of the third. One by one, they fell. The queen's lips parted slightly. It wasn't just skill, it was something deeper. She remembered the ancient words, warnings spoken by those who had fought humans long ago. They fight beyond reason. They fight even when death is certain. They fight because surrender does not exist in them. And now she understood. The man stood tall in the midst of fallen enemies, his chest rising with heavy breaths. Blood streaked down his side, his body battered, but his spirit unbroken. He looked at the soldiers still circling him and laughed. "Is this all you've got?" he shouted, his voice echoing. "Send more, or come down here yourself." The queen's eyes narrowed. His challenge cut deeper than a blade. Around her, whispers spread among her people. Doubt, fear, questions they had never dared to ask. If one human could do this, what would an army of them accomplish? The queen straightened, hiding her unease. "Enough," she commanded. Her voice was sharp, but it no longer carried the same weight. The soldiers hesitated. Their eyes flickered toward the human, not their queen. And in that hesitation, the tide shifted forever. The human lowered his weapon, blood dripping from its edge, and met the queen's gaze. His smile was gone now. His voice was low, steady, dangerous. "Remember this day," he said. "You thought I was a man surrounded by your army. But the truth is, you are the one surrounded." The queen's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in her reign, she realized the battlefield no longer belonged to her. It belonged to him. The queen's fear. The queen sat rigid on her high throne, her silver robes falling like a river of steel. The battlefield below was filled with chaos. Broken armor, sparks of fading weapons, and the groans of her once glorious warriors. She had unleashed her best, the 10 champions who had never known defeat. And yet, before her very eyes, a single human had shattered them. Her face remained calm, cold, unreadable. But behind her glowing eyes, thoughts raced like storms. How is this possible? She wondered. No one should be able to stand against them. Not one, not even 10. She clenched her jaw, forcing her breathing to remain steady. To her soldiers, she had to remain unshaken, their queen, their eternal strength. But inside, a shadow spread. It was not just surprise. It was something deeper, something she had buried long ago. Fear. Whispers of memory stirred in her mind. She had been young when she first heard them. Old stories told in hushed voices by council elders, stories dismissed as myths. They spoke of a species on the edge of the galaxy, fragile in body, yet terrifying in will. Creatures who survived wars they had no right to win, who refused to surrender even when crushed beneath empires. Humans. She had laughed then. How could such fragile beings be a threat? Their bodies weak, their lifespan short. The galaxy was filled with races stronger, smarter, faster. What could humans possibly do that her empire could not? But now, she was watching the answer unfold. The man stood among her fallen warriors, blood soaking his skin, his chest scarred and heaving, yet his posture unbroken. His eyes burned not with desperation, but with fire. Fire that did not fade, no matter how many blades cut him, no matter how many enemies stood in his path. He was proof that the stories were not myths. They were warnings. The queen's fingers curled around the armrest of her throne until the metal creaked beneath her grip. She felt the eyes of her soldiers flicker toward her, uncertain now. They had seen their champions fall. They had seen their queen's best fail. And in the silence that followed, their faith wavered. If one human could do this, what would an army of them bring? The thought chilled her more than the sight before her. Down below, the human lifted a weapon taken from her fallen champion. His grip was firm, his body steady, though streaks of blood ran down his side. He raised his head, locking eyes with her. For a moment, she felt as though the distance between them vanished. His gaze cut through her like a blade, stripping away her pride, her certainty, her belief in power. She felt as though he could see into her, see the unease she tried to bury. Her heart quickened, but she forced her lips to curl into a smile. A queen must never show weakness. "Impressive," she called down, her voice sharp, echoing over the silent crowd. "But you bleed. You suffer. No matter how strong you believe you are, your body will fail. And when it does, my soldiers will bury you in the ground you stand on." Her words carried power, but her people did not cheer. Their silence was heavy. They had seen too much. The human only tilted his head. His smile returned, not the grin of arrogance, but something colder, something that made her chest tighten. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low yet cutting across the battlefield. "Pain doesn't stop us. It sharpens us." The queen's breath caught. His words echoed the very warnings she had dismissed. Humans did not fight because they were stronger. They fought because they refused to stop. Her fingers tightened further around the throne. For the first time in her reign, she questioned her own judgment. Perhaps unleashing her champions had not been a show of strength, but the beginning of her undoing. The alien crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers spread like fire. They looked at her, then at him, their loyalty tested. Doubt was poison. and she could feel it seeping into the hearts of her people. She forced her eyes to harden, her voice to cut through the air. "Enough games," she commanded, though the edge of desperation betrayed her. Below, the human adjusted his grip on the spear. His body swayed with exhaustion, yet his stance was unyielding. He looked up at her throne once more. "Games," he said, his voice cold. "No, Queen, this is only the beginning." Her pulse quickened, and in that moment, she understood something terrible. This man was not just a soldier. He was a message, a warning of what was coming. And for the first time in decades, the queen of an empire felt small. The blade writhed, his arm useless. The storm twitched once, then fell still. And in the center, scarred and bloodied, the human still stood. The crowd fell silent again. The queen's lips parted, her mask of control fracturing for the first time. This was not a man. This was something else. Something her empire was not ready to face. The human lifted his bloodied hand, pointing at her once more. "One by one," he said, voice ragged but strong, "I'll tear down everything you think is unbreakable." And the queen, for the first time in her reign, felt the sharp taste of true fear. Victory and warning. The battlefield was still. Smoke drifted across the broken ground, carrying the metallic scent of blood and burned earth. The three enhanced warriors, the blade, the shield, and the storm, lay shattered at the human's feet. Their glowing armor flickered weakly, their bodies groaning in defeat. Around them, the queen's army stood frozen, weapons trembling in their hands, fear written across every face. And in the center of it all, the human stood alone. His body was broken, his skin burned and bleeding, but his spirit burned brighter than the suns above. Each breath was heavy, but his eyes never wavered. His scars were no longer wounds. They were proof that he could not be broken. The queen rose from her throne slowly, her silver robes rippling in the wind. For the first time in her reign, she looked down at an enemy and felt powerless. He should have been dead long ago. 10 warriors had failed. Hundreds had failed. Even her engineered champions had fallen before him. Her soldiers looked not to her, but to him. Their loyalty, their belief, was cracking like shattered glass. And the silence of the crowd cut deeper than any blade. The human dragged the bloodied spear across the ground, its tip leaving a trail in the dirt. He raised his head, his voice rough but steady, echoing over the ruins. "You called this entertainment," he said, pointing the weapon toward the queen. "You thought I was prey. You thought I would break. But now you know the truth." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. "If this was your best, your empire should fear the rest of us." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The queen's jaw tightened. His words spread like fire, a whisper that would become legend. The queen stepped forward, her voice sharp, though the edge of fear cracked beneath it. "You think this victory matters? You are one man, one soldier. My empire is endless. You cannot fight us all." The human chuckled softly, the sound dry and dangerous. "You still don't understand. I am not here to defeat your empire. I am here to remind you." He took another step, his bloodied body moving with unshaken resolve. "That humans don't stop. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever." The queen froze. Her soldiers shifted uneasily, their grips on their weapons weakening. For the first time, she could feel control slipping through her fingers. And then, as if fate itself wanted to prove him right, the sound of engines echoed in the distance. The sky rumbled. The crowd turned their eyes upward. From beyond the horizon, dark shapes appeared, sleek, metallic vessels cutting through the clouds. Human ships. Their engines glowed with fire, their hulls marked with the insignia of Earth's warriors. The queen's heart sank. This was not one man. This was the beginning. The human lowered his weapon, a faint smile tugging at his lips as the ships descended. "You wanted a show," he said quietly. "Now watch what happens when more of us arrive." The soldiers whispered nervously, some stepping back, their loyalty breaking. The queen's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time in her life, she had no command to give. The human raised his voice one final time, the sound cutting through the fear and silence. "Remember this day. Remember my face, because the war hasn't even started yet." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. The queen sat back on her throne, her hands trembling though she tried to hide it. She had unleashed her best, and she had lost. The stories were true. The humans were not to be underestimated. And now, the shadow of war stretched across her empire. The man stood tall, battered but unbroken, as the first human ships descended onto the battlefield. The crowd of aliens, once so confident, now looked at him not with hatred, but with awe and dread. And in that moment, a single human had become a legend. The last stand. The battlefield was quiet, but it was not peace. It was the silence before a storm. Broken armor and fallen soldiers lay across the dirt, glowing weapons fading one by one. The human stood in the center, chest heaving, blood dripping from open cuts, but his stance unshaken. His presence alone filled the air heavier than 1,000 soldiers could. The queen's eyes burned with rage and unease. Her champions had fallen, her soldiers hesitated, and whispers spread like poison through her ranks. She could not allow this to continue. She had one final card left to play. "Enough," she declared, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "If ordinary warriors cannot break him, then I will unleash those born for war itself." From behind her throne, shadows moved. The ground trembled as 3 towering figures stepped into the light. They were larger than the other champions, their armor fused with veins of glowing crimson energy. Their bodies were not entirely flesh. They had been engineered, enhanced beyond nature, shaped in secret laboratories where pain was the cost of power. The crowd gasped. Few had ever seen them before, and those who had never spoke of it again. The queen's lips curled into a thin smile. "Behold my true weapons, my enhanced warriors, the blade, the shield, and the storm." The human raised his eyes, watching as the 3 spread out before him. Each one radiated menace, their movements deliberate, their glowing eyes locked onto their prey. His grip tightened on the spear he had taken earlier. His body screamed with exhaustion, every wound burning, but his smile returned. "Finally," he muttered, "a real fight." The first warrior, the blade, charged forward. He was the fastest, moving like lightning, his twin energy swords carving the air in blinding arcs. The ground split beneath his feet as he struck. The human blocked one strike with his spear, but the second cut across his shoulder, burning through flesh. He staggered, pain flaring, but twisted his weapon and slammed the shaft against the blade's helmet. Sparks erupted as the alien stumbled back. Before he could recover, the second warrior, the shield, advanced. His massive frame was covered in reinforced armor, a glowing shield fused into his arm. He swung it like a hammer, smashing the ground where the human stood a heartbeat before. Dust exploded into the air as the man rolled aside. But there was no pause. The third warrior, the storm, raised his hands, and arcs of electricity crackled from his body. Bolts of energy lashed out, scorching the battlefield, forcing the human to dive behind a fallen soldier's armor for cover. The scent of burned earth filled the air. The crowd roared with renewed confidence. This was no ordinary trio. They were monsters built to end wars. The human's chest rose heavily as he stood again, blood dripping down his arm. His vision blurred for a moment, but he shook his head, forcing clarity. He gripped the spear tighter. "All right," he said, steadying himself. "Let's see what you've got." The 3 moved together. The blade struck from the left, the shield from the right, and the storm unleashed bolts that lit the ground around him. The human dodged, blocked, and countered, his body moving like instinct, every motion born from years of war. Sparks exploded as weapons clashed. Each impact rattled his bones, every strike a test of will. The blade sword sliced his ribs, drawing blood. The shield's blow sent him sprawling across the dirt. The storm's energy seared his back, the crackle of burning flesh filling the air. The queen leaned forward, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. Now he will fall. But then he laughed. It was a broken sound, rough and pained, but it carried across the battlefield like thunder. The warriors froze for a moment, unsettled. The human rose slowly, his body shaking, his blood painting the ground. And still, his eyes burned with that same unyielding fire. "You hit hard," he rasped, spitting blood. "Good. Now it feels like home." With a roar, he lunged forward, ignoring the pain, ignoring the burns. He slammed the spear into the shield's glowing arm, sparks flying as cracks spread across its surface. The shield staggered back in disbelief. The blade struck again, swords flashing, but the human twisted, grabbing one wrist and snapping it with brutal force. The alien screamed, dropping his weapon, only to be slammed into the ground with a strike that shook the dust into the air. The storm unleashed another wave of electricity, but the human, instead of dodging, drove himself through the pain, spear raised high. Lightning scorched his flesh, but he endured, closing the distance in a single charge. With a final cry, he drove the weapon through the storm's chest, the crackle of energy exploding outward in a flash of light. When the dust cleared, the three enhanced warriors lay broken. The shield gasped, armor shattered.